The Fisherman's Tales. The sun was dipping low behind the horizon as the old fisherman, Captain Elias, sat on the weathered dock, his calloused hands gently rocking back and forth on his old wooden chair. His boat, the Sea's Whisper, bobbed in the gentle waves just beyond the pier, a silent testament to decades of service. The sky above was painted in warm hues of orange and pink, but the chill of the evening breeze was starting to creep in, a reminder that the night would soon take over. The few fishermen still left on the docks were finishing up their work, packing up the last of their day's catch, preparing for another quiet night. It was always peaceful here, away from the bustle of the city, where the sea spoke to those who cared to listen. Captain Elias had seen it all, the storms, the calm, the days that felt like they would never end, and the nights when the darkness seemed to stretch forever. He was a man who had spent more years at sea than on land, and it showed in his worn clothes, the deep lines in his weather-beaten face, and the gentle sway of his movements, like he was still drifting on the waves. A few young fishermen gathered around him, drawn to the warmth of his fire and the familiarity of his presence. They had heard the rumors, about the things Elias had seen, the stories he told. Everyone knew he had more than just fishing tales, his stories carried with them the weight of the sea itself, and there was something about the way he spoke that made even the most skeptical among them listen. "Gather round, lads," Elias called in his gravelly voice. He gestured to the small fire beside him, the crackling flames illuminating his face. "I've got a tale for you tonight. A tale of the sea, and the things it takes, and the things it leaves behind." The younger fishermen settled down, their faces glowing in the firelight, eager to hear whatever Captain Elias had to say. They didn't expect to hear much more than another tale of a storm, or a shipwreck, but there was always a flicker of something deeper in his words, a hint that there was more to the sea than most were willing to admit. "Now, listen close," Elias began, his voice low but steady. "This is the tale of the ghost ship, and the crew that went looking for it." The fire crackled louder as Elias paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. The young fisherman leaned forward, captivated by the tone in his voice. "Years ago," he continued, "there was a ship, the Lady's Promise. She was a fine vessel, one of the best in her time, captained by a man named Captain Blackthorne. A fierce man, a man of the sea. He had eyes as dark as the midnight ocean, and a reputation for sailing into waters where no man dared to go. But there was something about the Lady's Promise that always set her apart. Something that made her special." The wind picked up, rustling the trees in the distance as Elias's voice grew softer, almost like a whisper. "They say Blackthorne had made a deal with something old. Something that lived beneath the waves. Maybe it was greed, or maybe it was something darker. But whatever it was, it cost him. And it cost the crew of the Lady's Promise more than they could ever have imagined." The fishermen shivered, the warmth from the fire not enough to keep the chill from creeping up their spines. They had heard rumors of sailors making deals with the sea, of sacrifices and strange happenings in the depths. But hearing Elias speak of it so casually, as if it were a part of the world they knew, made it feel real. Captain Blackthorne and his crew set sail from this very dock, not knowing what awaited them beyond the horizon. Elias continued, his voice steady and calm, despite the rising tension in the air. "They sailed for days, for weeks, through waters no man had charted before. The further they went, the darker it got. The skies turned black, and the ocean grew still, as if it was holding its breath. But Blackthorne didn't turn back. No, he was determined to find it, the thing that would make him the richest, the most feared captain in all the seas." Elias paused, staring out into the water, lost in his own memories. The fire crackled as the silence stretched on. "They say the sea has a way of luring you in," Elias went on, his voice becoming more somber. "It promises you things you think you want. But when you get too close, when you cross the line, it takes something from you in return." He looked at the young men gathered around him. The crew of the Lady's Promise found what they were looking for. But they didn't return with treasure. They didn't return at all. The young fishermen exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard stories like this before, stories of ships lost to storms or the unknown, but this one felt different. The way Elias spoke, the way his eyes glinted in the firelight, it was as if he had been there, as if he had witnessed the terrible truth for himself. "There's a place out there," Elias whispered, "where the sea doesn't want you to leave. And once it has you, it keeps you forever." The wind howled, and the shadows around them seemed to stretch longer, as if they were listening. Elias's voice grew darker, filled with the weight of something ancient. "The lady's promise went missing for years," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of history. "The crew, gone. But then, one night, a ship appeared off the coast. It wasn't the lady's promise. It was a shadow of it, barely recognizable. But it sailed through the fog, silent as a ghost. And when they went to board her, they found it." Elias leaned forward, his face close to the fire. The crew had changed. They were still alive, but they weren't human anymore. Their eyes were black, like the depths of the ocean. Their skin had turned pale and waxy, like it had been soaked in the sea for far too long. And when they spoke, it wasn't with their voices. It was something else. He let the words hang in the air, and the young fishermen were silent, their eyes wide with unease. "Do you know what happened when they tried to bring them back?" Elias asked, his voice almost a whisper. "They turned their boats around, wanting nothing more than to leave the ghost ship in the fog. But it was too late. The sea had already claimed them." The wind picked up, a low rumble of thunder in the distance. The fisherman huddled closer, leaning in, caught in the grip of the story. "You see," Elias continued, "when a ship and its crew make a deal with the sea, it's not a deal that can be broken. The ocean doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. Once you've crossed that line, once you've taken what it's offered, it owns you. And it always comes for you, in the end." He fell silent for a long moment, staring at the flickering flames. The air had grown heavy, the kind of heavy that comes before a storm. The fisherman could feel it too, something was out there, just beyond the horizon, waiting. Elias's voice broke the silence again, quieter now, as though the tale had drained him. "So, if you ever find yourself out there, on a foggy night, and you hear the creaking of an old ship, or you see a shadow pass over the water, just remember one thing: the sea remembers. And it doesn't forget." The wind howled again, and the fire flickered, casting long shadows across the dock. The fishermen sat there for a long time in silence, their minds heavy with the weight of the story. And as the night crept in, and the stars above began to shine like distant beacons, they couldn't help but feel that Elias's tale wasn't just a story. It was a warning. The whispering depths. The fire crackled on the edge of the pier, the last warmth in the cooling evening. Captain Elias sat back in his old chair, the familiar scent of salt water and pine wood mixing in the air. It had been a long day, but the night was his favorite time, when the stories came alive, swirling with the smoke from his pipe and the whispers of the sea. The old men of the town had always said that the sea didn't forget, that it always had a way of making its stories known, whether you were ready or not. The few fishermen who remained on the docks had gathered around, drawn in by the glow of the fire and Elias's deep, rumbling voice. They had heard him speak of the ghost ship and the cursed waters before, but tonight, there was something different in the air. The wind was still, almost too still, and the waves were gentle, barely a ripple. It felt like the sea was waiting for something. Waiting for a story. Elias puffed slowly on his pipe, his weathered hands steady. He looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of sunlight dipped below the waterline. The first stars began to twinkle faintly, just beyond the shadow of the cliffs. "There's another story I've never told you lads," he said, his voice softer now, as if the very night demanded respect. "A tale of the deepest parts of the sea, where light never touches, and things far older than man's time on this earth dwell." The fishermen exchanged curious glances. It wasn't like Elias to tell stories of places beyond their shores. They knew the waters here, shallow, known, explored. But the deeper reaches of the ocean? That was another world entirely. Elias shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at the fire. You see, not all sailors get lost in the storms. Not all ships go down with the wind. Some find themselves drifting into a place where the sea remembers them, where it has a hold on them, and they can never leave. The wind picked up, a slight breeze that sent a shiver through the group. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the men's faces. There was a crew, years ago, a crew that had sailed the seas longer than most of you've been alive. They were men of the ocean, masters of the deep. The ship was called the Black Tide, a ship as dark as the waters it sailed upon. Its captain was a man by the name of Captain Alaric, strong, proud, and a little too eager to conquer the unknown. Elias leaned forward, his voice becoming lower, more deliberate. Captain Alaric had heard rumors of a place far from the normal trade routes, a place where the water was said to be unnaturally dark, where the sea seemed to pull at your very soul. And like any good captain, he wanted to see it for himself. The men listened intently, the air growing heavier with each word. They say he found it. The place, I mean. They were days out from any land when they came across it. It didn't look like anything special at first, just another stretch of water. But the moment the black tide entered it, everything changed. The air went still. The sea grew quiet. No birds, no waves crashing against the hull. Nothing. Elias paused, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. The crew felt it first. They felt a weight on the air, something pressing down on them. And the whispers started. Just whispers at first. Quiet voices, like the wind moving through the rigging, but no one could make sense of them. He shook his head slowly. You see, that's how it begins. A little something, a whisper that makes you think you're hearing things. But it's not your mind playing tricks. The sea is calling you. The young fishermen sat still, their minds racing, trying to picture what Elias was describing. They tried to turn back, Elias said quietly, but it was too late. The water wouldn't let them. The crew tried to steer the black tide away, but the ship didn't listen. It was like the very water beneath them was pulling them deeper. And as they sailed further into the dark stretch of the ocean, the whispers grew louder. The fire crackled, sending a few embers into the air. Elias took another drag from his pipe before continuing. They say that night, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, the ship stopped. Not by the crew's choice. It just stopped. The sails flapped uselessly in the still air. The men grew frantic. They shouted at the captain, they cursed the sea, but nothing happened. And then, as if the sea itself had decided to show them its power, something rose up from beneath them. Elias paused again, his eyes flickering as though he could see the scene unfolding before him. From the water came a shape. It wasn't a sea creature, not like anything you've ever seen. It was more like a shadow. A dark shape, rising from the depths, silent and immense. Some say it was a giant, some say it was a ship, but no one knows for sure. All they knew was that it was watching them. The fishermen shifted, unease creeping into their expressions. The whispers grew into voices. They weren't calling out to the crew. No, they were calling to Alaric, Elias said, his voice almost a whisper now, as if the words themselves were dangerous. The voices promised him power, riches beyond imagining, a place in the sea's eternal realm. But to get it, he had to give something up. Elias leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting out toward the water. Alaric was a proud man, too proud. He saw no harm in it, in making a deal with something he couldn't understand. So, he agreed. He agreed to become part of the sea, to take what the ocean offered in exchange for everything he wanted. The wind howled in the distance, rattling the trees near the pier. But once the deal was made, it was too late. You don't make deals with the sea. You don't accept its gifts without paying the price. And when Alaric accepted, the ocean took him. Took the entire crew. They vanished, just like that. Gone. The fisherman sat in stunned silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the air. The last of the evening light disappeared behind the horizon, and the sea seemed to stretch out in every direction, endless and still. Elias spoke again, his voice softer now, almost a warning. You see, the sea has its way of holding on to things. Once you've made a deal with it, once you've sailed into its depths, there's no turning back. The crew of the Black Tide? They're still out there, somewhere. You won't find their ship, but sometimes, on the quietest nights, if you listen close enough, you can hear the whispers. And if you're foolish enough to go looking for them, well, you'll find what they found. The fire flickered, casting long shadows over their faces. There's a lesson in it, Elias added, his voice quiet but firm. The sea takes what it wants, when it wants. And you don't make deals with the sea unless you're willing to pay the price. Always remember that, lads. Always. Depths of Blackwater Hollow. It had been 5 years since Claire had left Blackwater Hollow, but when the letter arrived, the memories came flooding back. She had tried to forget about the town, tried to bury the dark history of her childhood, but the letter had reopened that door, one she'd worked so hard to lock away. The letter was short, just a few lines, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. Come back to Blackwater Hollow. They're waiting for you. Claire had no idea who they were. No idea who could be writing to her after all these years. But the feeling that gripped her wasn't just curiosity. It was fear. Fear that something in that town had been waiting for her all this time, something she had been running from her entire life. The last time she had seen Blackwater Hollow, she had been a young girl. She had been there with her parents, in that house by the woods, the house that still stood, untouched, at the edge of the town. The house where they had moved when Claire was just a toddler. The house where her parents had vanished. She remembered the eerie quiet of the town, the way the air felt thick, as if the world outside Blackwater Hollow didn't quite exist. The people there were always watching, always waiting for something to happen. And the woods, there was something in those woods. Something dark, something that had haunted her nightmares for years after she had left. But she had to go back. She had no choice. The letter had been a call she couldn't ignore. As Claire drove toward Blackwater Hollow, the landscape around her seemed to change. The trees grew thicker, the air heavier, and the further she got, the more oppressive the silence became. The radio static on her car's stereo matched the stillness outside, as if the entire world was holding its breath. When she arrived, the town was just as she remembered it, small, isolated, and decaying. The streets were lined with crumbling buildings, their windows either shattered or boarded up. The air smelled like damp earth and rusted metal. There was no one in sight. Claire parked her car in front of the old town hall and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. The ground felt soft beneath her feet, like it was sinking, as if the earth itself was swallowing the town whole. She looked around, but there was no sign of life, no movement. The town felt abandoned. Yet, she knew she wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she made her way toward the house at the edge of the woods. The place where her parents had disappeared. The place where she had been forced to grow up, alone, surrounded by whispers and shadows. When she reached the front door, she hesitated. The house was exactly the way she remembered it, shrouded in darkness, the paint peeling off the walls, the windows dark and empty. There was no welcoming warmth, no sign of life. Just the quiet, oppressive feeling that had always clung to it. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open. It creaked as it moved, the sound echoing through the empty halls. The air inside was thick with dust and mildew, and the smell of decay filled her nostrils. She stepped inside, her boots leaving marks on the floor, and immediately felt the weight of the house's presence. It wasn't just the physical decay. It was the feeling, the oppressive, suffocating energy that seemed to linger in every corner. The house had always felt like it was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake, to let her guard down. Claire's heart raced as she moved deeper into the house. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows stretching unnaturally as if they were alive. The further she walked, the more she could hear faint whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She stopped at the foot of the staircase and looked up. The stairs seemed to stretch endlessly, their wooden steps creaking under the weight of something she couldn't see. The air was colder now, and she could feel a presence behind her, but when she turned, there was nothing there. The whispers grew louder. "Come up." Her breath quickened as she slowly began to climb the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The house seemed to shift around her, the walls stretching and contracting as if the house itself was alive, moving, breathing. When she reached the top of the stairs, she froze. At the end of the hallway stood a door, her parents' old bedroom. She hadn't dared to go inside since they disappeared. No one had. But now, something was pulling her toward it. The whispers were louder now, more insistent. "Come in, come inside." Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. She didn't want to open it. She didn't want to see what was behind it, but she knew she had no choice. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. The room was exactly as it had been when she left it, untouched by time. The bed, the furniture, the walls, all were covered in dust, but everything was in its place. The room was suffocating, the air thick with the weight of memories. And then, she saw it. On the floor, in the center of the room, was an old, cracked mirror. It wasn't there when she had left. It hadn't been there when her parents were around. But now it was, and as she looked into it, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her reflection wasn't hers. It was a twisted, contorted version of herself, her face pale and sunken, her eyes wide and vacant. And behind her, standing just out of sight, was a shadow, a figure, tall and thin, its form indistinct, like it was made of the darkness itself. The whispers began again, louder than ever. "It's time." The figure in the mirror moved closer, its long, skeletal hand reaching out for her. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she turned, but there was nothing behind her. The room was empty. The air was heavy with the scent of something foul, something decaying. But the figure was still there, in the mirror, its hand now outstretched toward her. She reached out, her fingers brushing the glass. And then, everything went black. Claire woke up on the floor, her heart pounding in her chest. She was back in the room, but the mirror was gone. The whispers had stopped. The presence was gone, but she could still feel it, lingering in the corners of her mind. The door slammed shut behind her, and the room grew colder. The whispers came again, now louder, more frantic. "You shouldn't have come." The walls began to close in, and the floor beneath her feet began to tremble. The house was alive, alive in a way that was far darker than she could have imagined. It wasn't just the house, it was the entire town. And the more she tried to run, the more she felt the pull of something that had been waiting for her to return. Something that had always been there, watching from the shadows. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "We've been waiting for you." The Lanterns of Storm Song Valley. It was the first evening of spring when Lila arrived in Storm Song Valley. The valley, tucked between two towering mountain ranges, was a quiet, peaceful place where time seemed to move more slowly, as though the winds themselves carried the weight of the world, holding it at bay. The town, no more than a few dozen homes scattered along winding streets, had always been a place of curiosity for Lila. Her grandmother, a woman of mystery and intrigue, had often spoken of Storm Song Valley, of the beauty of the place and the strange, timeless quality it seemed to possess. Lila had inherited the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town after her grandmother passed, and she had decided to come and spend some time there, partially for a change of pace, and partially to find some clarity in her life. She had no particular expectations of the place. All she knew was that there was a certain magic in the air that made her feel at peace, and yet, every so often, a quiet hum of something otherworldly seemed to whisper from the hills. The farmhouse, though weathered by age, was still sturdy. The walls creaked as Lila moved through the rooms, as if the house itself were sighing in welcome. It was a home built with love and care, and while it felt like a new chapter, it also felt like she was returning to something forgotten, something her grandmother had left behind intentionally. The air inside was thick with old memories, of laughter and stories passed down from generation to generation. But there was also a sense of solitude, one that Lila welcomed, the kind of solitude that didn't feel lonely but rather like a deep breath, a pause before the next chapter of life. As the sun set that evening, Lila made her way out into the yard to explore. The soft golden light bathed the valley in a tranquil glow, and the mountains surrounding the valley were painted in shades of lavender and rose. She walked toward the small woods behind the house, where the trees were thick with age and the underbrush thickened into a carpet of moss and soft ferns. In the distance, she could see the town below, nestled along the banks of a winding creek. She had heard that Storm Song Valley had a long tradition of crafting lanterns, delicate, hand-painted lanterns made of glass and metal that were said to capture the spirit of the valley itself. They had been used for generations, not just as a source of light, but as a means of connecting the living with the unseen, with the things that could not be explained. Lila had heard the story once, from her grandmother. The lanterns were believed to have a mystical quality, that they could hold memories, that they could capture moments from the past and hold them in the glass. People would light the lanterns on certain evenings, during the festivals or when the full moon rose high in the sky, to honor the spirits of the valley and to bring good fortune for the year to come. But her grandmother had always spoken of them with a hint of hesitation, as though there were something more to the story than what she let on. "Maybe you'll understand when you're older, dear," she had said, her voice soft but heavy with something unspoken. "Just know that when you light those lanterns, you're not just lighting a flame. You're lighting a piece of time." That evening, after her walk in the woods, Lila decided to venture into town. The air was still cool, the scent of fresh pine and earth clinging to the breeze. She wandered through the narrow streets, admiring the charming houses and the cozy little shops that lined the main road. People smiled as they passed, but they didn't stop to chat. It was as if they were accustomed to quiet, as though the rhythms of the town had been set long ago and had never truly changed. She arrived at the small artisan shop near the center of town, the one her grandmother had spoken of often. The lanterns were displayed in the windows, casting their soft, flickering glow into the street. They were beautiful, intricate designs painted in soft blues, greens, and warm golds, each one seeming to tell its own story. Inside, the shop was cozy, filled with the scent of wood and dried herbs. A small, elderly woman sat behind the counter, her hands moving steadily as she worked on a lantern. She looked up as Lila entered, her sharp eyes assessing her as if she were trying to place her. "Welcome to Storm Song Lanterns," the woman said with a kind smile, her voice soft and melodic, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. "I take it you're new to the valley." Lila nodded. "I'm Lila. I inherited the farmhouse up on the hill. My grandmother spoke of this place, the lanterns." The woman's eyes softened, and she set down her work, dusting off her hands. "Ah, your grandmother. She was a good woman. Always had a fondness for the valley, and for our lanterns. She used to come in here often. I'm Emma." Lila smiled, feeling a sudden connection to the woman, as though she had stepped into something much bigger than herself. "I've heard stories about the lanterns. That they hold memories. Is that true?" Emma's expression turned thoughtful, and she nodded slowly. "The lanterns capture more than just light. They hold pieces of time, memories of the valley's past. But, the lanterns also have a way of remembering us. People who come to visit, people who leave. They carry those pieces with them." Lila frowned, not fully understanding. "What do you mean? Are you saying they can hold memories of people?" Emma leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. Yes, but not just any memories. These are memories tied to the land itself, to the valley. It's an old magic, one that most have forgotten. But your grandmother, she understood it. She knew that the valley has a way of keeping its stories. And sometimes, those stories need to be remembered. Lila was quiet for a moment, processing Emma's words. Are you saying the lanterns are magical? Emma smiled gently. Magic is a word people use when they don't understand something. What we have here, it's not magic. It's the valley's way of holding on to what it doesn't want to forget. And when people leave, when they pass through, the lanterns help carry their stories, their energy, through the years. Lila stood in silence, the weight of Emma's words settling into her mind. She felt a strange pull to the lanterns, a desire to understand what her grandmother had known, what she had left behind. She reached out, her fingers brushing the glass of one of the lanterns on the shelf. The coolness of the glass sent a shiver through her fingers, and she could have sworn she saw something move within the lantern, a flicker of light, a whisper of memory. Which one do you think will remember me? Lila asked, almost to herself. Emma watched her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow smile, she reached for a lantern at the back of the shelf, one that was slightly larger than the others. The glass was a deep, rich green, with delicate vines etched into the surface. This one, Emma said, handing it to Lila. This one has seen many people come and go. It's special. Lila took the lantern, feeling its weight in her hands, and for the first time since arriving in Storm Song Valley, she felt a connection to something greater than herself. She didn't know what the lantern would hold, or what it would remember, but she felt that whatever it was meant for her.